Hey, Alec Miller here, founder of Rose and Rogues, and today I talked to Julian Curi about his short film, Gruff. If you haven't watched it, pause this video and go watch it, and then come back and listen to this interview. It is a fantastic interview, and we talk about not just the short film, not just communication issues with loved ones and how that impacts us, but also about art, about making something that isn't just to meet a quota, that isn't just based on statistics or heuristics, but making something that's a human story that comes out of your heart, and how to help artists, communicate this stuff with their audience, with the world, and why it's important. I'd really appreciate it if you'd give this a full listen. I think it's a really good. The ending is really great. Julian has some awesome advice to motivate artists to make work. So if you're an artist and you want to make something, and you've been struggling, or you're uncertain about it, or you look at the road being multiple years, it's going to be really hard. This is a very encouraging interview. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Julian Curi. I reached out to you and I wanted to talk to you because you made me cry, frankly. Like, I was watching Gruff, and the guy even looks like my grandpa. I don't know if I'll throw a photo up or something like that, but that's exactly the relationship I had with my grandfather. And I sent it to my mom, and she also cried because it was the relationship she had with her dad. And then I made my wife watch it, and she also cried because it was the relationship she has with her dad. So all like kind of men of very little words. My grandpa also used to be a spy in the Cold War. So he worked for an agency. More or less, it was Shield, right? Like, the agency is, so it wasn't called Shield. I can't remember the acronym right now, but it's very close. It was like counterintelligence, more or less. And we'd always ask him questions about it, and he'd say, well, I could tell you, but then I'd have to kill you.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Yeah. But what's fun is things would become declassified now and then. And whenever they did, then he'd be like, oh yeah, that was me. I worked on that. That was my thing. And we were like, what? And that's all we'd hear.
Wow.
We wouldn't hear like, here's what I did, here's how I did. But it's kind of funny. We have pictures of him in in Paris and other places where he traveled. And he's just like a really cool super spy, retired from the army, and then ended up trying to become an entrepreneur, started and lost a few fortunes. Unfortunately lost them all before we could inherit any of the money, but so no generational wealth over here.
Man.
He ran a fish farm out here in Arizona for a little while, which seems a little counterintuitive, but when you realize there's like not a lot of local fish that's fresh, it's like, well, a fish farm might be the way to do it. And then he that started and failed. He had a construction company that started and failed, and then he also had he tried making a off-roading car called a doodly bug, which was like a little just off-road buggy. And then VW, when they were redoing all their patents and stuff on their bug, right, which was the Volkswagen bug. It was just called bug colloquially until they re-released the car, and they decided to actually patent and copyright the term bug. And so they found any other automaker, including my grandfather, that had the word bug in their car, and then said, hey, we want to buy all the rights to all that for $4,000. And he's like, no, it cost me more than that to develop this and the patent. And they said, that's fine, we'll just sue you because we have lawyers on staff. So
oh God.
So yeah, he wasn't able to fight them, just lost the rights to that. So but he just always kept striding. He kept stride, right? He's just like, all right, next thing, next invention, next thing. So seeing that character and sort of him not really communicating verbally, right? Like a lot of his pride or a lot of his feelings, but then being able to pass that on was really, really cool. So I just wanted to ask you, is there someone in your life that kind of inspired this? Are you the guy that's trying to say I'm not good at communicating? Who's this based on?
Well, I think everyone kind of has that. I don't think communication is easy for anybody.
Mm-hmm.
If it is, then I'm sure they've worked very hard at it. Expressing emotion is what has created thousands of years of incredible art and music and drama. The drama of human existence is expressing emotion or not expressing it correctly.
Right.
So I think all of us deep down have issues with that. More closely, though, the Abuelo character is based on my dad.
Okay.
And my dad was not in the CIA, but he was in Homeland Security. So I got a lot of the spy inspiration from him. Like he was that super spy to me.
Hmm.
Um, uh, and while he wasn't quite as nonverbal as the character in Gruff, um, emotionally, I think was where a lot of that verbal apprehension came from, which is also just a guy thing too.
Right.
Like men in general tend to struggle with this, and as someone who had interests and pursuits in the arts, it's difficult to kind of share that excitement and that passion with someone who is not as verbally
Right.
agreeable with that kind of thing. So I definitely combined his character with other men, other fathers in my life
Hmm.
who were much more nonverbal and had that very gruff persona. Um, so yeah, not quite exactly my dad, but he looks like my dad. I definitely modeled his image after him. But yeah, it was just kind of how I reconciled ways that I wish we could have engaged with each other more when he was alive. He passed away in 2018.
Hmm.
And while our relationship wasn't as strained as the one in this short film, I know that a lot of people's are. I know that a lot of people go without talking to certain loved ones because they aren't being heard, or they aren't hearing the other person out. And it's an issue that I don't think we talk about very much. Our culture today is very obsessed with drawing lines and setting boundaries and
Hmm.
putting up red flags. And there's we're developing such a diverse vocabulary for boundaries, but we're not developing a diverse vocabulary for building bridges.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have to build a bridge between two people who are very different, and it's not a matter of, well, because you don't love the way that I do or you don't communicate the way that I do, then I'm cutting you off. You're out of my life. Families and humans are so much more complex than that, and a lot of times we have to sacrifice our preferred method of communication or of love to have someone else in our life. And I think that empathy is not discussed enough. And a few people have kind of criticized the short film, saying, no, you have to use your words. Like that,
Mm.
the short film kind of gave that guy a free pass. And I don't disagree with that, because deep down, I wish that the gruff people in my life who are nonverbal, yes, I wish that they were more verbal.
Hmm.
But you get the time that you get, and you get the people. You don't get to choose your family. You only have one shot at it, and so if that means compromising and meeting someone halfway, then I think that that's a valuable aspect to culture and to family. So that's why I wanted to explore that, of what does that look like when one party doesn't necessarily win over the other, but we kind of meet halfway and have to understand where the other's coming from.
No, yeah, that's something I've been watching play out a lot, and it's really. I mean, first off, I'm sorry for your loss. I'm sorry that, um, you seem like a young guy, so it's always hard to lose a family member. It
Thank
seems
you.
like fairly young, and um, but I'm glad you guys didn't have as strained a relationship, right? But it's obviously
Yeah.
a good reminder. But I've noticed that play out a lot in society at large, but amongst
Hmm.
like the people I know, anyways, colloquially, this idea of cutting people off, of if you're not able to communicate the way I want you to communicate, then you know I'm not. No one's willing to compromise, right? We're sort of in a no
Yeah,
compromise society as a
exactly.
whole, and there's times to put up boundaries, right? Obviously, but at the same time, there's sort of this underlying, and I would say, Christian ethic of, forgiveness, and offering the first olive branch and being the first one to we used to call it like being the bigger person, right? It's like, I
Yeah.
know what I'm doing isn't fair. I know that I'm in my rights to expect more from you, but
Hmm.
there's a greater thing to appeal to, which I'm going to, in service of that, offer, do the thing that seems counter intuitive, right? So rather than
Certainly.
forcing you to come to my side, it's like, you know what, I'm just going to communicate the way that you need me to communicate. And I don't think you should do that in a way that feels like you're just like capitulating or whatever. But I think you handled that very, very well in the film. It's
Thank you.
it's very clear that it's not just like this like power play or move by her dad, and then she's just capitulating. It's her realizing that that he communicates differently than she would like, but she can see what he's actually trying to say, right, in his actions, and then realize that she's still the one that's flexible enough to bend, right? And I think that's something that's hard for people is, and I don't like too personal with this because it's not my life, but I have a friend who's in a complete state of separation from his mom, and they've had a very hard life. His sister died when they were young, and it really put a lot of strain on their relationship, and that turned into other things. But I think what's hard is his mom can't bend. It's like they're in a place of unflexibility. And I don't think, by the way, in this case, I don't think the solution is in this current case, him bending, because that doesn't seem to work either. So that's just a toxic relationship. But there is a sense of like, there are people that are at a point in their life where they can't really, they're incapable of making the change you need them to make. And so in that case, like, I think that's where you have to meet them with love. And you have to meet them, like you said, with true empathy. I think everyone throws around empathy. Like, it's weird. Empathy is talked about like almost nonstop, but then nobody actually understands what empathy really is. I have a whole video, which is like, I made way a long time ago, a few years ago, but it's like pseudo empathy is what I call it. And essentially it's this idea of like, I just wanted to establish like all the rules around empathy. Like, you can't empathize with a group, because what empathy is you have to put yourself in someone's shoes. And as soon as you say, well, here's 10 people you have to empathize with, it's like, that's not possible, because they all have different experiences. And so for me to say, it's like really egotistical for me to be like, oh, I can experience what all of you as a group have done. It's like, that's not possible. That just becomes sympathy. It just becomes, projection or whatever else. But like, empathy is me taking one other person and then saying like, okay, how can I put myself in their position in this case? And then empathy has limits, right? You can't empathize with someone you have zero common ground with. I can't empathize with a pregnant woman because I don't even have a place to pretend, right, what that would feel like, So there's a whole bunch of rules, I think, actually around empathy that we don't talk about when we're talking about empathy. And so it just ends up becoming this like blanket term that gets diluted from the actual like, sort of powerful thing it could be. You mentioned sort of, wanting to communicate this, and there's a sense of loss in the film. Was this inspired? Like, did you choose to write this or make this shortly after your father passed, or is this something you did a while after, or were you already working on it before?
I technically started writing it in 2020, coming from making live action short films. Once the pandemic hit, it was, I made a couple short films in and around the house, but I very quickly realized that I was going to run out of settings and scenarios that could happen around the house, despite however many props and costumes I have at my disposal. So having a background in fine art, I thought, well, why don't I just combine them and become an animator overnight? And that was not possible. I very quickly realized I would not have the patience to draw 12 frames a second or 24 frames a second. Stop motion also kind of intimidated me. It felt very like mathematical and very planned out. And I'm much more of a organic, do it and I'll film it kind of guy. So that's where the puppetry aspect came about with this story. And I knew that I wanted to confront this topic in some way. There were a lot of notes, a lot of documents that were sort of the seeds of this story that were plans for a live action version of it, not as large scale, not as epic at all. The plan was to kind of make that my film festival darling, where, I hired a couple A-list actors, put them in one room, only hired them for a couple of hours, and then sort of build out the rest of the world around that. So I had a lot of scraps of the story that were for that. And obviously with the pandemic, that just felt like, well, now it's never going to happen, or it's not going to happen for a very long time. So knowing that I couldn't really go out and work with other people, I thought, well, why don't I take that story and expand on it and make it even more epic, because I can go anywhere if it's all handmade and it's all done here in house. So I really stumbled into the process and into the style, because originally I was going to rig all these puppets in the computer. I was going to paint them, scan them. I started this process. I did months of this, of painting and scanning forearms, hands, faces
Hmm.
from all directions. And I just could not. I'm sure you have way more experience in this, but I couldn't find the texture. I couldn't find the light, and the real like personality in it. It looked like a really bad 2D cartoon
Mm.
where, everything was just moving on 2D planes, and I didn't really know how I could get depth and emotion and character out of it. So I I was very depressed. I scrapped it, and I
Oh.
thought, this is such a personal story that it'd be such a shame to have it look so visually flat.
Hmm.
And after a couple of weeks, and storing all these fragments of of body parts and furniture pieces and whatnot that I had painted to be scanned in,
Hmm.
as I was putting them away, I kind of noticed how beautifully the natural light of, my window was hitting it, and how it was watercolor paper. So it had this almost skin-like texture to it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And I
There's a
thought,
bit of
well,
like subsurface scattering going on there.
yeah, exactly. And it has fibers that
Hmm.
are on it, which is really beautiful. So I thought, well, if I can find a way to build all of these in real life and film them, surely it can't be too hard to remove puppet rods. And it's not hard, it's just tedious. And
Hmm.
I found that that just ended up being so much more visually interesting, and I could pull in my lighting knowledge and just light a real physical thing. So, a little 6-inch LED from Amazon in this scale is a sky panel. It's
Yeah.
like the light of the sun. So all the gear that I already had just translated really well to something of this scale. Um, and then just scene by scene chipped away at it for a really, really long time, not knowing really what I was getting into, but upgrading along the way, upgrading my computer system, upgrading camera
Right.
systems, trying new approaches for the digital removal of the puppet rods. So that's the long story of how it was kind of inspired, and I stumbled into this kind of paper puppetry, compositing hybrid
Right.
style.
So you said you started in 2020 and then
Yes.
had one idea, scrapped that, and then now we're 2024, obviously, and it's out. So it's been about a 4 year process.
There was a solid year in there where I took another job doing this
Okay.
style for a feature documentary,
All right.
which was awesome because I pitched this style, and that gig ended up kind of being like paid school, so
Yeah.
I could experiment with.
That's always super nice. Yeah. I sort of
Oh
have
my
a similar
gosh.
thing going on right now with a bunch of particle stuff I want to play with. And then there's a logo animation that's having to line up at the same time. And I'm like,
I
yes.
love it when that happens. So then when you go back to your personal thing, you're way more educated.
Yep.
Maybe you can afford a few more extra bits and bobs and
Hmm.
gadgets and toys. So that's what happened. And that was the longest job, but there were plenty of other jobs in between there. So when I say that the film took almost 3 years, that was scattered across
Right.
this 4 year time period.
And so you said there was a year where you took a normal job. What were you doing to kind of pay the bills in those other 2 years or 3 years? Like, you know,
Well,
just scattered.
um,
Well, you can just tell me.
before this project kind of went viral online, I was just taking editing and camera operating jobs. And
Okay.
that's kind of been my bread and butter. Whether that's recitals or promotional stuff, I just kind of take what I can get.
Right. So not super
Um,
glamorous. It's just like, hey, here's a
oh no,
wedding that needs to be shot. Here's a whatever, and you're
yeah,
just like, sure, I need the cash.
yep. And I've been okay. I was okay doing that. And as um, as we were sort of coming out of the pandemic, that was when this documentary came along.
Hmm.
And, I just couldn't pass it up. I'm like, this is steady money. I get to kind of practice this technique. And as that project was coming to an end, I made a little sizzle reel compilation of both the work that I had done on that documentary and what I had filmed up to that point of Gruff, which I hadn't touched in a really long time. And that video was kind of just announcing, hey, here's what I've been up to. I've been kind of playing with paper, and I don't know, we'll see where this goes. And that video went viral on TikTok, went viral on Instagram, and overwhelmingly thousands of people were saying, just tell us where to send the money. We want to see this. So that's kind of when I shifted perspective and said, well, what if I take 2023 to solely work on Gruff? If I do a crowdfunding campaign, maybe I can afford a year of not doing other jobs, not doing the side hustles. And that's what happened. I released a GoFundMe in December of 2022, and we were fully funded within January, I think, of 2023. And that just afforded me the year to turn down those side hustle jobs. I still took a couple here and there, just to kind of like keep up the client relationship. But 2023 was mainly Gruff, and then sharing that process on social media ended up becoming its own revenue stream as well. So on top of the GoFundMe campaign, which would have been fine, would have been plenty to sustain me through the year, social media became its own form of passive income. So I just kept filming what I was doing, posting videos, updates as I went along. And the more viral that those went, the more of a passive income stream it could become, while also growing the audience, so that by the time the film actually came around, there was a huge demand for it because people had been watching it be made this whole time.
Right. So this is sort of my whole theory around short filmmaking and how it should be monetized is and independent filmmaking. So let me ask you a few questions about this. We'll get a little nitty gritty, and then maybe we can get back to the emotional stuff.
No worries.
But so when it comes to this, first off, let me ask, so if you're comfortable anyways, what's the specifics around like the GoFundMe? Like, what was your goal for that?
The goal was 25K.
Okay.
I felt like that was a modest yearly salary for a low income person.
It's a very, very modest. Yeah. I don't think I could live off of 25K with my wife right now, but
yeah, but I mean, I knew like, hey, look, I can take a couple little editing jobs here and there on the side. Like I will live, but I really didn't want to shock people with that felt like a big number to me, but I also didn't want to scare people away. I wanted it to seem doable, and if we exceed that, fantastic. But I felt like it was a good sweet spot where it seemed achievable and it seemed doable, but it was also enough that if I only just got that it should be enough to sustain throughout the year.
No, that's always a hard thing. I was working on a game that I told like, you need to put the money like way up here, and they were like, well, they had like, it's a game. There's multiple people working on it, and there's a Kickstarter, and I was just telling them like put it way high, guys, put it way high, and they're like, we're just gonna ask for like, I forget what it was. It was pretty low, and they like hit it within like 24 hours, and I was like, all right, get some stretch goals, please, at least like get some,
for sure.
It's hard because I think as independent people, we don't understand. Kind of like a lot of the money's so tight for us for so long, that like asking me like, with $25,000, that's so much money. And then, you look at a feature film budget and it's like, $500 million, right? And you're like, okay, well, evidently that's what it takes to make something that often, not always, but often isn't even as good as what a lot of people are making. And then you see something like Godzilla -1, right? Where it's like whatever, $15 million or whatever it was. And it ends up being like looking better than things that are made by the $100 million, right? It's like, so the money isn't really the key always, but it's definitely what you need to live. And I think we had such a hard time valuing our stuff when you look at the hype, when you look at the views, it's like around Gruff and stuff like that. It's like, this is something that's more valuable than like a lot of full-on shows on Netflix, right? There's shows that aren't getting this viewership, that aren't getting this engagement, that aren't getting, people like that are this passionate about it, that are not that visually interesting. And yet they have these huge budgets, right? So, and so then for as far as like the building the journey being monetized, what did that look like for you? Like, is that, and you don't have to give specific numbers, but it's just like, hey, it was
I mean,
enough to like,
I wish I could give specific numbers
yeah,
because that it changes. Like
right.
TikTok is an ever fluctuating app, and
Mm-hmm.
now that it's going to be like banned in the US, who
Yeah.
knows what the monetization there is going to be like. Um, for a little bit of 2023, you were able to monetize on Instagram, and
Mm-hmm.
now just nothing. Nobody can make a penny off of it, no
Yeah.
matter how many views you get. Um, so it's crazy. Near the end of 2023 was actually when I started uploading these onto YouTube for
Mm-hmm.
YouTube Shorts. I always saw YouTube as like a finished product
Right.
website,
Right.
kind of like, oh well, that's where the final thing can go. And Shorts were really not a huge draw socially. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's not really a culture on Shorts
Right.
that I knew of at that time. So I thought, well, I have all these videos that I've been pumping out to Instagram and TikTok, so let me give YouTube a try.
Mm-hmm.
And because that space was not as crowded as the other two apps, the views on YouTube went nuts
Mm.
for Shorts. And within probably like 2 or 3 months, I went from 3,000 followers to 1 million.
Right.
And that was only
Really?
by
So
posting Shorts.
you were only at 3,000 before? Because I've known your work for a while, and I just assumed that you were kind of slightly known, in like sort of the YouTube world.
Nope. Nope.
Interesting.
Nobody was watching anything, man.
Wow. Wow.
I definitely thought Vimeo was like the only place to
Oh,
post
yeah,
your
yeah. One of
films.
those. Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, I don't know when the exact date was, but for a while I was kind of skirting the 3 to 4,000 subscribers on YouTube until I started uploading all these shorts.
Oh, that makes sense then, because you're like, well, your subs aren't too low. I'm like, dude, I have like no sub. I have 2,000 people. This is garbage. And then I'm like, you have millions. You're like, well, that was like just in a split second. Like, so.
I know it was absolutely crazy, and I think you're able to monetize after a certain.
Yeah, we just got monetization, and I
Okay.
think I've made $10. So.
Yeah, no, it varies. Like I think
Right.
on TikTok, there are different programs that you can be a part of that pay a certain
Right.
amount. Like I'm part of the creativity program, which like the price per 1,000 videos,
Views, yeah.
it varies per video. So I'm like, what the
Yeah,
hell?
yeah.
I don't know. So to
Yeah,
actually
with YouTube, I
rely
think
on it.
it's based on your audience. So if your
Oh,
viewers are like if they're a certain age and they tend to be in a certain sector, you get more money. So the most profitable sector, of course, is finance, and then it's like housing. So if you make like housing videos, the CPM on that can be like 30 or 40 bucks or whatever. But then
what?
if you're making like entertainment for children, like or like gaming videos, like the CPM is really, really low. It's like a couple cents or whatever. So it
Oh,
depends on your viewer, and it depends on how much money they spend. So if they're like a high spender and they have this
really?
analytics to track your viewers, and it's like, hey, we know that if we send them a link that they're going to buy a product off of that
Oh
YouTuber, then that goes way, way, way up. So
my gosh, that's so depressing.
yes.
I'm just
That's
like, how can we make profit off of people? And that's the
yeah.
only metric for how you get paid.
Yep.
But yeah, I think on YouTube Shorts, it's abysmal. It's like 20 cents per
Dude, I was
per
just looking
million.
at even getting monetized on YouTube Shorts. I was like, well, what do you need to get monetized? It's like either 1,000 subscribers is one. You also need X many watch hours. And on regular
Yeah.
YouTube videos, it's something like 40,000 watch hours. And I was like, oh, that's so many watch hours. And then on Shorts, it's over 1 million. It's like 10 million watch hours or something. I'm like, that's an insane number of watch hours. But like
Yeah,
as you said, because it's a smaller uh, pool, like it's
yeah,
doable. If you
definitely.
have the right content.
I'm gonna start and stop my DSLR real
All
quick
right.
because it has that like 30-minute
All good.
limit.
All good.
Okay, start it back up.
Okay.
No, definitely. The whole monetization game is such a daunting experience, and I do not envy anyone's experience where that is their sole source of income.
Hmm.
So I really see it as a passive thing. Like, all right, that's if that can pay some groceries and some little
Right.
bills here and there, then that makes me stress out way less about it.
Right.
But with the social media and the crowdfunding campaign together, it was a really happy marriage where not only is income coming in, but the community is building and the audience is growing. So I would highly recommend that for any upcoming filmmaker, is to share the process online
Right.
every step of the way, because you and your process are more interesting than your story. I don't care how interesting your story is, but if your process and how you're discovering it and how you're growing as a filmmaker, if you're being vulnerable and you're not gatekeeping and you're sharing
Hmm.
and you're not trying to show off, you're just sharing your growth. Whether your movie is good or not, an audience will feel invested in it.
Right.
If the movie is good, then they will engage with it so much better. And that's what I'm finding with this, is like investing in your community is much more impactful and much more beneficial than seeing people as customers.
Right. Yeah. I'm trying to emulate that. I have a really hard time. And I don't know where this came from. Somewhere during the pandemic or shortly after, I lost like a lot of confidence and a lot of just like faith in probably other people and myself. Like I don't know exactly what caused it, but it just sort of happened, and I'm kind of mad at myself about it because I've never had like imposter syndrome my whole life. I've always been like, yeah,
Oh,
I'm a decent artist. I'm not the best artist, but like that's fine. Just be honest about it. Like that's always been my solution
yeah.
to feeling insecure, is you just say whatever it is you're insecure about, and then it's out in the open and no one can hurt you, right? There's this great line by in Game of Thrones, I think, and it's the Ty whatever his name is, the dwarf
Hmm.
character, and he's like, whatever your flaws are and your insecurities, like wear them as a badge of honor, as armor, and no one can hurt you, right? Like,
Yeah, I love that.
yeah, and that's always sort of been my attitude about it. But then suddenly it happened, and I think part of it is, I think some people started looking at me as a bit of a quote unquote like an expert or whatever. They started like asking like, oh, how do I do this and what's this, and like, well, you know about this, and like, and I think it's because I became a boss as well, and I started becoming more of a director and less of somebody like making the art themselves,
Hmm.
that I started getting like really insecure about my skill set and then telling other people what to do while not like necessarily knowing how to rig something properly or how to be like an animator or whatever, like how to do all the specifics. And so I've been trying to rid myself of that and just get back to sharing openly and just being like, hey, I'm just on a journey with all of you. Like we're all on this
Totally.
journey together. You're going to see me screw up. You're going to see me make mistakes. I think part of it's the culture at large makes you feel like if I say the wrong thing, if I do the wrong thing, it's kind of going back to what we talked about earlier. Like there's not going to be that empathy there. There's not going to be that like forgiveness there. It's going to be like, well, you said it wrong, and therefore that's not okay, right? Like you were saying,
Hmm.
even this short, which I can't imagine anybody having a problem with. It was very just well done and fair, and like just obviously a love letter to the people that have people like this in their lives. And then it's like somebody's like, oh, well, he should have been the one to change. It's like, dude, then you tell that story. Like for me, I'm like, then
Yeah,
cool.
sure.
There's room for this story and your story. You go tell that story, right? But it seems like there's sort of this problem when everyone has a microphone, right? It's like, I mean, could you imagine if like whoever, Jules Verne, whatever, whoever you want to talk about, like gets to hear like every single opinion on there. Like, you
Yeah.
finish making Casablanca, and then all of a sudden all the people are like, I didn't like it. Like you get to hear them come up to you and tell you, like, and it's millions of
Yeah.
people. You're like, this might have been a mistake. But at the same time, there's also the power of that, right? Which is like, well, the people that do like it, you can focus on them and you can connect with them, and speak to them. And I think it's really true what you're saying. Like what I've noticed over and over again is this case where I'll look at something that I'll say, I'm very judgy and I should get over it, but that's just kind of how I was like raised. But I'm like, this wasn't the best film. This wasn't the best thing. How come this is getting all the views or whatever? And like a lot of times, it's the people like open and honestly sharing the process, like sharing their journey on the way to the thing. And then
Hmm.
when the thing comes out, it might not be all that, but like it gets huge reception just because people are there for they're a part of it, right? They're like, I'm a part of this
Exactly.
journey and I want to see this become, be completed. So I think that's definitely super super powerful. And when I think about what's so funny is when I think about other people's work, like when I was watching you build stuff and it still had the little sticks in it or whatever, or
Hmm.
there's plenty of other artists I follow that are making something, and if it's like not fully textured or not fully, the animations are still in like a sketch phase, I'm never judgy about it. I'm always like, oh, that's so cool. Like, I'm really happy that they're doing this. And then I think like, oh, if I share something, people are going to be like, it sucks, like, so I don't know where that attitude comes from. I think I may have lost you here. Let's see. Is my internet out?
It It got a little choppy.
Okay,
But
there you go. It looks like you're coming back slowly but surely. Give it a half
okay.
second. But yeah, so I always feel really judged when I'm putting something out there that's rough or incomplete. But then I never have that attitude, or not never, but I rarely have that attitude towards other people that are sharing stuff that's like not fully fleshed out.
I mean, I think that all art, even completed art, from the masters, it's just growth frozen in time.
Mm,
And when you look at it that way, then everything is its own
that's a good. I'm
little
gonna steal that. It's
snapshot.
a really good phrase. It's just, yeah. I said it, I forget who I stole it from, but it's like nothing's ever done. It's just due, right? Like
Yeah, or it's abandoned.
right,
You walk away from it, and that makes me feel better um, when I'm in a process, especially when it comes to visual effects and the more computer side of all this process.
right,
I get so easily overwhelmed and daunted. Like, I don't know how to run this program. Like,
yeah,
I mean, this whole film was just in After Effects, and that even felt too complex for me. I'm much more of an analog guy, but it's like, okay, as long as I'm doing my best, that's all I can do. I can't become a new person overnight. I can't ingest completely new skills overnight. I just have to do what I can with the time that I'm given.
right,
And you have to give up at a certain point and put it out there and walk away and do better on the next one. Um, and that's why I love short form. Anything in general is it forces you to get it done and do it as best as you can and move on quickly. As much as I'd love to do a feature film someday or like a series in this form, I don't want to get stuck for even more years in one story because I always want to iterate now. I always want to change, and I'm always
right,
seeing the things like, ooh, okay, we're locked into this script, and I can't really turn back. But I'm really looking forward to sort of fixing that in the next story, in the next
right.
short film, or even technically, like, oh, I think I want to explore how to make the characters move a little bit differently, but
Hmm.
I don't have to wait 10 years to do that. I can just do it on the next one. Despite this being a very time consuming process, I still see it as, short form, short films. And I think that too many people put too much weight on their baby, on the one big dream project, the thing that
Hmm.
they think is for sure going to get them far in their career.
Right,
And, what's gotten me farthest is iterating often and publicly.
right,
That not the quality of it. The quality inevitably will increase the more you do it. But if you invest all this time into making one thing, then you're only that good. You're only that project's, barrier uh, of excelling.
right.
If you do it more often, you can excel more often. So I'm totally with you. I love short form, and I think that it should be valued as its own art form rather than a means to an end.
Right. I
I'm
think,
I'm I'm a fan of poetry, and I think that if we kind of compare short films to poetry, you don't ask a poet, well, when's the novel coming out? Is this a concept for the novel?
yeah,
It's a
yes,
poem.
yes,
It's just
yes.
a poem. Enjoy it.
That's a really good analogy because poetry is another one that's really hard to monetize.
Yeah, exactly. But
You
not
know?
everything has to be
Yeah,
monetized for it to matter
I know.
or
So
to be beautiful.
yes, I'm 1,000% in that camp too. Where I think we have. I don't want to get too far off on this, but it's a fun rant. Which is, I think we have everything backwards right now. So I think there's this weird idea that first comes like that everything is a bank, right? Like right now,
Mhm.
I go on this rant often, but like Starbucks is a bank, right? It's weird that Starbucks is a bank because what they do is you have star points and you put money on your account. And the money sits in the account until you go and pay for your drink. Well, that money's sitting there. They're loaning out that money, right? So somehow my coffee shop went from being something that service is, hey, we make good coffee and I have with a smile and star skills, and then you give us money because you like coffee, to being, you give us money, we take that money, we invest that money, we make profit off that money that you invested, and then we redistribute that money into new investments. And the coffee is really just the scheme to
It's
get
the
you to give
front.
us the thing, right? And so, and there's this weird sense with hospitals where they're like, well, how can we like manage profit. We're like, no, hospitals exist to make people well. A byproduct of making people well is profit. And short films, and this is what all the gaming companies don't understand, is they think there's a trend, and then you make a game that follows that trend, and then there's a market for that trend, and then you make all the money, and then you get out. And it's like, no, the trend is created by somebody making something good, right? Like like the trends aren't just these like things that exist. Like there's this weird concept amongst all these finance bros that like, oh, if you could just get the right combination of like open world plus, whatever, plus this, right? And same with movies. It's like, and that's what how Disney literally makes their movies right now is they have a bunch of IPs they buy. They buy like 70 or so IPs every year, and they just sit on them. And they attach all this metadata to these IPs. And then they wait until they notice market trends, and then they go, what IP has all these trends in it? So they go like, oh, what's trending right now is mermaids seem to be going up, and then like summer, and like plus like beaches, plus this, like, oh, here's something that meets all those trends, right? It's like, so let's then make that film. And they're letting that decide what makes a film. And it's like, dude, all those trends were created by people just making things like out of passion, right? And like the answer is like, you make a good film, and that good film makes, the result of it is it makes money. And there's this weird idea that we can reverse engineer, we can reverse engineer Godzilla -1. You can reverse engineer Dune. Like I'm seeing all these takes right now, which is like, oh, people want longer movies. That's what they're learning from Dune. Like, oh, what we want is longer and more. And it's like, no, we want good movies. Dune just happens to be a good long movie. Like, and so I agree.
Set in the desert. That's going to be the rage. Like, no, you're getting the wrong thing.
Yeah, exactly. No, exactly. You're looking at the parts and thinking it's the whole, right? And it's like, no, it's the whole. The whole is what we care about. Yep. And so I totally agree with you about it not, and the reason for making a short film isn't to make money. Right. Like, I think clearly none of us have gotten into this thinking we're going to make money. I've only lost money on this. You spent a few years of your life for $25,000 initially, right? That's not exactly, that's not like great. Like, no, I don't know any investor that's like, yeah, that's the way to go. Like spend 3 years, or 2 years working up to a Kickstarter that makes $25,000. That's not necessarily a financial thing, but you do need money to live, right? You need money to eat, you need money to feed other people. And so my goal with short filmmaking isn't to make anyone rich, but to make them sustainable. So it should pay for itself. It should pay for the time and the effort it takes to make it. And I think the way you do that is by monetizing all the things no one else can monetize, right? So like you said, the journey. So like if you're in Hollywood, you're not monetizing any of the journey. In fact, it's all under NDA. No one's allowed to talk about the film or behind the scenes or the accidents you made or anything like that. So it's like, that's something that we have an advantage of as independent artists, right? So it's like, put that up for people, and not necessarily, I don't mean like monetize it like in a dirty sense. It's like, give people the option to buy that. Give people the option to invest in that. Like, there's a bunch of other things that I think we could do. Everyone kind of just looks at like merch or whatever, right? But I'm like, I think we should start selling our R&D, right? Like start putting that out there for purchase, right? There's a YouTube channel I follow, that's like a woodworking YouTube channel, and he's just like learned things along the way, right? It's like, here's all the stuff I learned, and it's like, I packaged all the stuff I've learned into one little class, and you can take that if you just want to know these techniques, right? So like, that's something, you have a very unique style. It's a very unique thing. This whole paper craft thing. I don't think too many people have really done it. It's like, wrap all that into a thing and like give it out to people. Hey, do you guys want to learn how to do this? Here's a short little class I can do. Again, that's the opposite of like a Disney who's like, this is our intellectual property. The R&D we did to make this thing has to be completely protected. We have to own all the patents for it. None of you are allowed to see it. And it's like, what's cool about being an independent artist is you should lean into that. It's like, okay, what can we do that they can't do? And I think one of the other things you can do is like what you did, which is like telling a story that's emotional. That's about something specific. That's about, that's something that like Hollywood wouldn't take a risk on because it's not interesting enough for them, or there's not a key demographic, or it's not broad enough. There's not a broad enough appeal. It's like, a little story about, I do think yours actually has a pretty wide appeal because it's like a very human and emotional story, right? But there's all sorts of little things like that I think are really interesting that are options to independent filmmakers, and in particularly short filmmakers, right? Because a feature is just too long, frankly, to make on your own, right? It's just way too much, or with a small team of like 5 or 6 people to tackle that is such a task. that, you know, that you need it, the bigger the scope, the bigger like the distribution has to be, the bigger all this other stuff. So like keeping it small, like you said, I think is a really good way to go with this stuff, you know. And I think, like you said, the tools are kind of there now, where like a light is, you know, a few bucks for a light, a few dollars for paper, a bit of paint, right? And the paint's probably the most expensive part of the whole thing. And then, you know, you can get something that looks really, really good. Talking of paint, I wanted to ask you about, you said you have a background as a traditional, you know, artist. What
Fine art.
Fine art. What does that look like? Did you go to university for that, or?
I didn't actually study it very much. I've taken a community college class here or there, you know, basics of drawing in high school, but I didn't actually study it. I've just loved it, and I've done it a lot. And here and there as another side hustle, I've done some commissions, doing paintings and stuff. So I've always enjoyed that side of it. I bring that into my filmmaking by storyboarding like crazy for live action, especially for this animated stuff. Storyboarding is how I visualize that's equally as important as the screenplay itself.
Right.
So this has allowed me to combine those passions even more, which I absolutely enjoy. And it also feels like playing with toys. So, you know, it's like painting, playing with toys, and then you get a little bit of visual effects compositing at the end, and you get something that looks like art, looks like toys, looks like animation, looks like all these things that I think just make people happy.
No, that's super cool to hear that's kind of, you've been able to bring it all together. I looked at your art on your website. I was really impressed by it.
Thanks.
Some of it has a religious bent. Are you Orthodox, or?
I grew up very, very strict Catholic.
Okay.
I still consider myself a person of faith, but my issues are with religion, or with the institution
Yeah, I think we all,
religion for the most part. But yeah, I think I found a place in my heart where it is not. It's not a feeling of hatred or disdain for, you know, the judgment and pain that I feel like I've experienced in my life at the hands of religion, because I don't think it's faith's fault. I think it's people's fault. You know, I've been hurt by people, not by the message, not by the, you know, the themes and the lessons and the stories that are associated with faith. So, yeah, I went to a Catholic school my whole life, went to a Catholic university. At the time, I definitely held a grudge against there not being as much emphasis on the arts or as much education available to me. But I've kind of ended up using that as my asset, because I ended up going out and seeking those skill sets on YouTube, in outside classes. And now I feel like I have more of an ownership of it, because I had to seek it out on my own, and it was driven by hunger and not just a lecture hall.
Right.
And so I always try and teach that to people of, you know, whatever your current setting is, there's so much that is available out there. You know, don't think that you have to move to Los Angeles, or that you have to own this camera or that, or, you know, these days with social media and the tools becoming so much more accessible, no matter what your environment, no matter what your background, you have permission to make art, and you have permission to learn outside of what's in your school, outside of what's in your community. Though this world is so connected, and there are experts everywhere who are sharing their advice.
Right. No, I think that's a really good message to people, because I think there are a lot of people that look at, well, it's not available at my school, right, or at my whatever, and I have that same streak in me where I've always kind of told people, you know, break the rules, like do it another way, then figure it out, then quit, you know. But I think we're also so scared to rock the boat, or, you know, to take a risk or whatever. And it's like, well, risk is inevitable, right? You're just putting that risk in someone else's hands, really, right? When you give away responsibility, the responsibility doesn't disappear. It's just now it's someone else has it, and they have the control over your decisions. That's all you've done. So if you say, well, I can only learn what my teachers, you know, teach me, or whatever it is, it's like all you've done is you haven't opened up that opportunity necessarily, haven't solved that problem. You've just put it in someone else's hands. And they can make bad decisions. It's still risk. It's just a risk that now someone else is taking, you know. Just like, you know, with a paycheck, it's the same thing. If you go, well, I don't want to be responsible for my paycheck, I want someone else to pay me. And it's like, well, all you've done is there's no less risk. You just removed yourself from the surface of the risk. Is how I like to tell people that about owning a business is like every business does this, right? Everyone's income is doing this. You're just down here getting paid below, this wave of
Yeah.
profit and loss, that you don't feel it is all, so, but it's still there. The risk is still there. The business could close, whatever could happen. So, I think that's a really good piece of advice. One of the things that's interesting to me is I feel like you have really good taste, for lack of a better word. Like, it's interesting to see you're able to like. I think the temptation for a lot of people that are making something that's more like, I'm trying to figure out the way to. I'm not going to communicate this very well, so just bear with me and try to.
No worries.
Hear it. But a lot of times you're making something that is like PG, right? If you're making something is going to be more like mass appeal, it's going to be safe. The problem that what most people want to do is they want to round all the edges, right? And you're able to keep a lot of things still spiky, is the way I would put it, right? So,
thanks.
Yeah, and I like that about all your art, right? Because you have one piece of a girl that's like looking at a bunch of Barbies, right, in plastic wrap, and it's sort of this, I'm not artist subjective, right? So it's like, in my sense, it's like sort of the objectification, right, of women, right? And she's looking at, well, what type of woman do I want to grow up into? And all the options are objectified, right? And normally I find someone making a statement about something like that either goes one way or the other way too far, right? It's like either they're gonna literally make them pieces of meat or something like that. It's just like very on the nose, or they're gonna like, they'll be completely nude and like, or they're too risk adverse, right? The overly, most of my religious friends, right? I also go with a religious background and very similar. Still consider myself, a person of faith, right? While having many critiques of pretty much all institutions,
Yeah.
But what I find is those people is if half of the time they can't even work up the muster to make art at all. It's like it's too risky for them even to do that, and it's too much of a rocking the boat. But then if they do, it's like incredibly safe, and so it's really cool seeing you be able to make something that is grounded, that feels like it's I could show it to anyone, right? It's like one of the few, like, I don't show most things to my mom that I enjoy that are short films, right? Because I live out in the world of edgy spikiness.
Okay.
But when I find something like yours, it's like really great because it's like, this is actually good. It's someone that actually understands what makes a story interesting. It doesn't pull its punches, right? And the character designs are good. I would even say attractive, right? But while also, it's like she's blowing up stuff and fighting things and people are dying. But at the same time, it's not gratuitous, right? It doesn't fall into that. And so, where do you find that balance? Is it just, you kind of just trust your gut? I'm guessing it's just probably, it comes from a mix of your background versus where you are today.
Sure. I think, kind of making this more abstract about art in general, I think a lot of people really take the fact that art is subjective they take that concept a bit too far, and they make just anything and think that the responsibility is entirely on the viewer.
Right.
And I think that there's a marriage between, or there ideally is a perfect hybrid between welcoming the audience in and allowing them to wonder and allowing them to interpret, but also having the skill set and the responsibility of having a point of view,
right,
and being confident with that. And a lot of the worst art, especially faith-based art, has no subtlety, and it does not invite, it preaches, it shouts.
Right.
And it thinks that because its message is good, that it doesn't have to have, beauty surrounding it,
right,
beauty in acting, beauty in lighting, beauty in music, because, well, the message is fine. And I think that exists in faith-based films and really avant-garde, crazy art films. They think, oh, well, because I'm expressing myself, I shouldn't have to have more skill set.
Right. And it's very
And
ironic that these two often hate each other, right?
oh
While
yeah,
having
I
the
mean,
same problem of not understanding how to make something actually good.
the extremes of any two massive chasms, whether political
Right.
or religious, have a lot more in common than they would like to admit.
Yes, yes.
And so I think the middle ground is having a point of view, having a world view, and then also taking it upon oneself as an artist and as a craftsperson to excel and uh, to do one's best and to
Mm,
constantly evolve and to constantly do more and to push the boundaries, to push your boundaries, to push your skill sets. And um, I, I don't think that we're seeing enough blending of that where there's people who really concentrate on the skill sets and then they don't view telling stories and
right.
communicating the struggle of the human condition. They don't see that as important of a skill as how to color correct your footage.
Hmm.
I think that film schools should encompass all of that. Your skill and your point of view are equally as important.
Yeah.
So as far as like taste or having an edge to art, I wouldn't quite say that I'm deciding project to project of like, oh, I'm trying to push a boundary here. It's
Hmm.
just what does the story need? Um, does it need to have a little bit more tooth to it? Does it need to have more bite, or can it be a little bit softer and more inviting? Um, and that conversation and that mindset is so counterintuitive to what we're told today of how to monetize,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
everything's monetized. Oh, well, that doesn't sound smart. Well, I don't care if it doesn't sound smart. It's
Right.
it's art. And if not a lot of people view it today, it might pop off in 500 years.
Yeah.
Like if you're telling the truth about the human condition, it will find an audience. Maybe not today on YouTube so you can get your check next month. Like
Right.
having making art for eternity has led to making better art than making art for today. And, I've been very lucky with Gruff that people today are enjoying it.
Hmm.
But even if nobody watched it, I would still be happy with it. I would post it and move on to the next one because
Right.
that is what I had to say about the human condition at that given point. And so I think it's important to just be honest with yourself about what does this story need. Yes, I realize that there's strategy with catering to the right audience here and there, and that's very important, especially if you really want to appeal to a certain demographic.
Hmm.
You do have to kind of speak their language a little bit, but human beings want to be challenged. They want to um, they don't want their hands held through the journey, but they want to know that there's a destination.
Right.
So films that get a little too on their high horse about being too abstract, well, then
Hmm.
there's no hand holding. And then, those films feel very vain because of that. It's like, well, you have to do all the work
Right.
yourself.
Right.
Well, frequently those films don't even have a point of view.
Hmm.
So finding that balance between, okay, tell me that we're going somewhere with this story, tell me that we're going somewhere with this work of art, but don't tell me how to get there. Let me get there myself. And
Right.
sometimes you do have to take some more dangerous roads to get there. And sometimes the highway widens up and, oh, that's how I get to that realization by the end of this film. So it really just depends project to project.
No, yeah, that's it's interesting because, like I said, I feel like you have a pretty wide breadth, of different things you can make, and I don't see a lot of people that have like a paper craft, um, film about family and multi-generational emotional
Hmm.
communication, right?
Yeah,
And then also have a commentary on like the objectification of women. That's a traditional art, like art gallery type art style.
sure.
So it's really interesting to see someone with the range and variety that you have, and I think it's really cool when you look out there and it's like, okay, you can do all of it, right? And I
Yeah.
think one of the problems is metrics. I really sort of hate metrics. I sort of wish we could go back to them not existing,
Hmm.
because it's like, yeah, back in like let's say the 80s, right, or whatever. It's like, or before, it's like you pitched a film and it was like, no, unfortunately there's some gatekeeper, right? Like, but there's just some guy with a cigar. It's like, sounds great. Or he's like, put in two more
Yep.
explosions, right? And that was just like his like gut. Like it was just like, what did he feel audiences wanted, right? And while
Yeah.
that sucks to a certain extent, I would rather take that over the like corpo nerd versions of that, which are like, well, it doesn't look like that's trending right now, and that phrase isn't the right thing,
Yeah.
and actually, this color palette is the trending color palette. You're like, no, the colors are subject to like to the artist that made those colors popular. Like you're seeing it all backwards. You're following, the wake of a ship, being like, well, I know that that's the path to go. It's like, yeah, but that's only because they broke that trail. You know what I mean? And
The way I like to word that is that when you follow your truth, not the trends.
right,
That
right,
when you make art that is from your point of view and based on your truth, that will attract more people because that's how trends start. To your point of the
right,
following in the wake of a boat, someone has to be the first, and
right,
usually those people don't give a fuck what the trends are.
right,
They make something and they don't care what about metrics.
right,
They care about the truth. They care about their point of view, and then all these people start following.
right,
Think about when you hear a really fresh, brand new song on the radio, and it doesn't sound like anything else. Well, that starts the trend. But when
right,
you make work that follows the trends, you will come and go as quickly as they do.
right. And what's irritating is, someone following the trend will be mad that they're not seeing the same success or the same whatever, and you're like, and especially when you're like the 18th, like Disney is sitting here confused, like, why isn't these superhero movies making money anymore? It's like, because it's a derivative of a derivative of a derivative, guys. Like,
Yeah.
like I can't keep diluting my product and then expect people to pay the same price they paid when they first came out and it was new and fresh. Like,
Yes,
and
exactly.
it's like you've like reheated this hamburger or this like stew for the 50th time, and now it's just
Yeah.
black. And then people are like, why isn't it working? Or I guess people are just tired of superheroes. Like, no, they're tired of the same thing over and over again. There's a fresh way to make a superhero movie, right? Like the Spider-Verse films kind of prove that, right? Like there's fresh ways to do this. Just don't keep doing that over and over again, But I really wish we'd use different metrics. I do think, views and money, because we like number go up, right? It's like that's the easiest thing to track, therefore we track it. But like, what if instead you tracked like number of people that wrote you afterward? What if instead you tracked like how many people were crying in the theater, right? Or what if instead you tracked like, how loud the laughter was, right? Like there's all sorts of things we could be tracking that if we measured on that level, would we be more successful? And this is what I sort of think, to not get too big about this, is sort of the problem with all of society right now is like what we should be tracking. If you're a hospital, it should be like successful, recoveries in what time. Like that's the metrics, not, our profit margin, not, whatever it is you could track. Like Amazon had this problem where they were tracking how many interactions you had with a customer, and they wanted to make it as few as possible, right? They were like, we want it to be like 2 interactions, and we're going to optimize for as few interactions as possible. Because what that meant in their mind was, well, if someone buys a product and then they're happy with it, that's 1 interaction, right? If someone buys a product and then they need one, hey, it was late or whatever, and then you resolve it, then that means you did a good job in customer service, right? But obviously you can see where that would lead to other problems, right? It's like, I don't know if that's necessarily the right thing to track. And so I think we keep looking at what we can track and judging ourselves based off of, because you have to judge yourself on some metrics, right? You can't just make something and be like, it's just out there. Who knows if it's successful? Because then you don't learn, you don't grow, right?
Yeah.
So you have to be like, okay, what am I measuring this on? And then what do I look like, what to me is success? So that way I can improve on that, right? Next time. And, I think one of the things you can track is like, it's hard to track that. And I think the more valuable it is, the harder it is to track. So something that's like, how honest was I when I made this, right? Like how was I being as honest as I could have been? And how can I be more honest next time? Like, how can I be more clear about what I'm trying to say? Or how can I get more of an emotion across that I wanted to get across? But those things are very hard to track. And therefore, anyone that's involved monetarily in this sort of a pursuit is like, I don't care about that. How does that equal money? Right? How does that equal profit?
Yeah. No, certainly. Yeah, I don't have the answer. I don't know what the best way to move forward is, how to, quantize art. I think at the end of the day, you just have to keep your nose in your work. And I like to tell people, don't worry about being the best. Just do your best. And someday it might become the best.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what keeps me going. I know what my limits are, and I try to live up to those, and that's it. Because someone else who has way more potential than I do, they're on a different journey. I'm not that person. Um, just do your best with what you have, and you do that every day, and improvement is inevitable.
Right. No, that's I think it's funny how it's always like the base things, right? Whenever you're doing art and people always go like the fundamentals, like gets back to the fundamentals, like, contrast, balance, lighting, color, right? It's like, and it's the same thing. It's like, hey, that same story that we've been telling forever and ever and ever about, just do your best, put in your effort and let go, and, let that God, let whatever it is, work its magic. Because you can't, it's too big of an equation for you to keep in your own head, right? So it's like, you have to just trust that I want to make this, I want to make it for a reason, and we'll see how it's received, And I think the fear is always like, it's going to be received horribly, everyone's going to hate me. But it's like, that's a risk you have to take, unfortunately.
Certainly.
I don't think there's no guarantees, right? If you could guarantee somebody any sort of return, if you could guarantee them a 2% return on their effort, like that would be the obvious best thing to do always. But you can't. That's why, in a certain sense, that's why any of this works, is because you can't guarantee, the return. Otherwise, it'd be a solved game, right? It's like, this isn't a solved game. There's always more moves to be made. I think we're about an hour 15 minutes.
No, I was gonna say I have a call coming up at 3:30 that I have to prep for, but we can wrap up however you want.
Let's wrap up, man. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
And I really hope people get a lot of value out of this. I think it's a really sweet and impactful film that you made, and I can't wait to see what you do next.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It was like, I wish we could do this like over lunch or something. This felt more like we're just chatting than an actual like interview video. So
that's the whole goal.
I wish we had more time.